A pretty memorable college football weekend, and that's for one reason. Colorado beating TCU. There's a bunch of games that I could get to here. I'll spend a little time on Florida State drubbing LSU at the very end, but I want to spend a good chunk of this week's Open on Deion Sanders and the CU Buffaloes. And I feel like there's a mix of the good. I don't know if bad's the right word, but a lot of maybe. Let's start with the good because there's a lot of it. It's the win. 21-point dogs, 20.5, depending on where you saw the line, against number 17 TCU. It's the fourth biggest upset in the history of CU football. Shedeur Sanders sets a school record for 510 passing yards, 38-47. He had four different receivers over 100 yards. Watching him, and I'll admit, I didn't know a lot about him. Watching him, I'm like, man, they get the ball out. The offensive line's holding up. But they also, between knowing exactly where to go with the throw immediately on so many of the quick throws, which I think can lead to some misleading numbers from a quarterback, they also were taking deep shots, and they were a real problem for TCU's defense. And I thought he looked terrific. Like early on, and I even tweeted before we even knew what the final score was going to be, I was like, forget even what the score is for me. I'm incredibly impressed with how well this kid has played. And of course, whenever you have the coach bringing in his son, naming him the starter, you're like, wait, is he actually that good? Well, you go back and you look at it. He's a 3-star. He had some offers from major programs. I don't know if he was actually going to play at those programs, but they were there. I'd asked around. I was like, look, before he ended up at Jackson with his father, what was the word on where he was going to go? And I think a lot of people thought he was going to end up at FAU. So if you're good enough to start there early on, does it mean you're good enough to start at Power 5? Yeah. So I think anybody, and I'll include myself, like, how good is he actually going to be? Is he only becoming the starter because his father has a job? Well, if that's why he got it, who cares? Because clearly, and on one afternoon, he looks good enough to at least be the starting quarterback for Colorado. The other part of this is I always like to ask the question of, are we doing something wrong? Anything in life. Like, hey, we've always done it this way. Is there a chance that we're doing it wrong? And that's the hiring of Deion Sanders. And Deion, who I had mentioned even last week, I remember him being on shows. This is over 10 years ago. I think when he was on the CBS show, he was sitting there campaigning to get the Atlanta Falcons head coaching job. And when he says that, most of us are like, wait, is he serious? That's not how it's done, right? Become a strength coach, be assistant to special teams, quality control, make no money, have this awful lifestyle. But you don't expect Deion Sanders, one of the greatest players ever in the history of this game, to maybe have to work his way up. But that's what we're used to. Not so much in basketball, but football. That's the culture of being a football coach. You have to pay all your dues. You have to do all these different things. But clearly he really wanted to do it, and he had a vision for it. And he goes to Jackson. He wins a ton of games. So you give him credit for taking that gig. And then basically when he took the Colorado job, it's like, all right, could he hold out and do better than Colorado, which at the time, I mean, it's one of the worst Power 5 jobs in the country. It's not even debatable. And he goes there, and you have Rick George, who's running the program, who he thanks a ton, going, this guy saw me, talked with me, hired me, took a chance when all these other programs wouldn't. And then you see what you have on a Saturday afternoon, and you're like, is this something we should start thinking about? Does this open doors for other people that want to fast track it, who have enough of a resume publicly because of players that they don't have to sit around and be an assistant for 10 years to hope to one day get their shot? Because can you imagine Deion Sanders sitting down with the people making this decision at CU and saying, look, I was able to get the number one recruit in the country in Travis Hunter. I was able to get him to go to Jackson State. Like, we can talk about Colorado's resources and how many teams is behind, but I was able to do that with that kid. Like, what do you think you're going to do? What do you think is going to happen when I actually get to a Power 5? Like, that's a pretty strong statement for your own case in the room. The other thing about Travis Hunter, who, again, the number one overall guy, 11 catches, 119 yards. He had a touchdown that was called back. His pick to the right side was incredible. Looked like it was a wide open throw. Looked like it was going to be a touchdown. And he's just that special physically, and the read and the jump that he makes on the ball. He picks it off. You're like, I can't believe he just intercepted that pass, because from the time it was released to where he was, you didn't think it was actually going to happen. So the other thing that I think is a huge positive is that Saturday was terrible. Usually we get one game, and maybe that's the Sunday game with Florida State and LSU, but usually at least there's one game on Saturday that we're all looking forward to. And the fact that Fox's big noon kickoff was TCU Colorado, when it was announced, I was like, they're really doing that just because of the Deion Sanders part of it? And then you look at the slate and you're like, I guess it's enough of a story, and there aren't really that many options. And they've got Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt on the call. Like, all right, let's do it. And for them to come back and win and all the attention be on them and the curiosity about Deion Sanders and all these transfers, they owned college football for a Saturday. And I tweeted about it, and of course it got turned into a bunch of different things. The point is a very clear one. That's a huge win for them that they got to showcase who they are in week one, while there weren't really that many other options, at least storyline-wise, that the audience would be interested in. Now, I want to talk about, and again, I shouldn't really categorize it as bad, but let's look at like the full scope of what Saturday meant for Colorado. Now, after the fact, it was a huge victory lap for Deion Sanders. And certainly the way he handled the media, other media members didn't exactly love it, being like, wait, you're not going to answer a question from a media member if he tells you that he doesn't believe after the fact, because Deion Sanders saw the doubt. His family saw the doubt. The staff saw the doubt. The players saw the doubt, because there was a lot of real doubt here. And as I've said in the past many times, I think we're all wired in a more similar way when it comes to selfishness. You can be a great person. You can be selfless about a bunch of different things, but there can be different versions of selfishness. And I think especially to college football, we can be really selfish about the I guess I should just say the negativity. Maybe in this case, it's the doubt. But here's an example. Like, think of all the different college football fan bases that have a team, it's rolling, they have big expectations, they have a late loss, and they think, oh, typical us. Well, typical you, or typical the way the sport works out. We don't end up with 8 teams that are 12-0, but you can, because you only care about the thing that's involved with the program that you love, like you only care about that kind of doubt. So the doubt for Deion Sanders certainly was there, but for Deion, that's the only one that he's going to pay attention to. So then it could become, well, I'm the only one that's doubted. And that's not really true. Anytime we have a college coach go to the NFL can't wait to beat up on that guy's chances. Right. And when the college coach fails, it's a failure because he was the college guy, because it's a much easier label. We love to label the stuff, as opposed to the lifer coordinator who finally gets his shot and he flames out in 2 or 3 years. We can't blame it on anything as specific as him not understanding the difference between college and the NFL. There's another thing too. I remember Jeff Saturday getting the job. Everybody hated him getting the job, felt like he cut the line, right? They won their debut. They won their first game, I think it was week 10 against Vegas. And Jim Irsay tweeted this out right after the game. Quote, all you critics criticize all of us in the NFL for losing. When we make moves to win, you act so righteous. Who you crapping? Just win, baby. And I went back and watched some of the post game from the media and like, well, maybe Jeff's going to do it a different way. He relates to these guys a little bit more. And then it was a disaster and he's not even the head coach anymore. And I'm not saying that Deion is Jeff Saturday. You would argue and you would win the argument that you like Deion's path more than Saturday's, which was one of the biggest issues with it. But it was just funny to go back and look at some of the smaller victory laps of getting a win after questioning him getting the gig, and then that not being the case. Now, I'm not saying that Deion and CU are going to turn into last year's Indianapolis Colts, but Deion took a huge victory lap, and people are going to love if they lose now more so than they may have been rooting against them before the game even kicked off. But I understand his reaction. I understand him looking at just the specific doubt about him, thinking it's only about him, when I think it happens a lot with new guys in new places. The roster turnover was historic. It was 20 more guys in the transfer portal than the next highest team. I think they had 51. Arizona State had 31. 87 new players since the spring. I would never think that a team bringing in 87 new guys and 51 transfers. Now, granted, it wasn't like they were replacing some awesome team. Colorado barely won 1 game last year. So it wasn't like you were getting rid of some powerhouse. But normally when you're thinking about building a team, you'd be like, oh, we've got 87 new guys. You'd be like, well, they're not going to be any good. But a mistake that I made that I just didn't do my homework on it. I looked at the 24/7 transfer portal rankings. And let's go through the top 10. UCLA at 10, Oregon 9th, Oklahoma 8th, Miami 7th, Florida State 6th, Auburn 5th, USC 4th, Ole Miss 3rd, LSU, the number 2 ranked transfer portal class. And at number 1 with 51 commits, 43 3-stars, 5 4-stars, and 1 star in Travis Hunter. The best grade that they gave out was to Colorado. So maybe they do have something here. Maybe they do it differently. Maybe, and I know Deion doesn't like the word culture, and I think it gets thrown around way too many times. We don't really know what it means. We just say, hey, the team won, they have a great culture. But maybe there's something about him that is different, that resonates with guys and gets all these players in, that you have something that they can really build in Boulder. Look, normally if a team's bringing in 87 new guys, I'm going to go, all right, well, that seems like a lot. 51 in the transfer portal. Arizona State was second with 31. It's not like they were replacing this all-time Colorado team. They barely had one win last season, right? So even though it wasn't like they were replacing great players, you're like, is that really going to work? And more often than not, I think moving forward, despite the lesson we may have all learned on a Saturday, I don't think I'm going to look at a team and be like, yeah, they got like 90 new dudes. Like, let me just do it over again. I'm fucking it up again. Sorry. All right, 3, 2, and 1. So back to the turnover with this. And, one of the things Deion was hitting on is like, oh, I brought in all these guys. And I think there was 8 or 9 players from the HBCU that came in, and he was like, I try to tell you guys and everything. Look, moving forward, I don't know that I'm ever going to look at a program that takes in 51 transfer portal commits, which was 20 more than number 2 in Arizona State, 87 new guys overall since the spring. I don't know that I'll ever look at a roster and be like, yeah, they're going to be awesome. Granted, they were not replacing a bunch of awesome players at CU when the team could barely win a game last season. So we understand the turnover, but I don't know that it's a new thing that I'll look at now going, okay, that's how I'd want a roster being designed, right? But there was something that I needed to do a better job on. And I looked at the 247 transfer portal rankings as far as classes going into this year. Let's run through the top 10. UCLA's at 10, Oregon 9, Oklahoma 8, Miami 7, Florida State 6, Auburn 5, USC 4, Ole Miss 3, LSU 2, and the number 1 graded transfer class coming in, according to 24/7, was Colorado. 1 5-star, Travis Hunter, 5 4-stars, and 43 3-stars. 3 stars of Colorado is actually a huge win, and he grabbed 43 of them. So maybe, look, I should have done a better job on that, but I still don't know that I would have looked at all of that and been like, all right, I can see Colorado having a winning season. We still don't know if that's the answer. As far as Travis Hunter, again, when he committed to Jackson, left Florida State, it was a topic made for Twitter, because then it starts reaching into all sorts of stuff that I don't think really anybody's saying. I think it's pretty simple. We talked about Travis Hunter more for 3 hours on Saturday than we talked about him for an entire year last year. Okay. And it's not any specific reason other than it just being how much we pay attention to certain programs. For the same reason why we all know who Jared Verse is now at Florida State when we didn't know who he was at Albany. And that's all it is. Now, to the maybe portion of the Open, maybe TCU's average is hell. Maybe average would be nice. Gus Johnson loved hammering that CU was beating the defending national champ runner-up. That's a really good headline, and it makes it even more dramatic, and it makes it sound even better. That's not the team they played. That team is gone. They're missing 11 starters from last year. They had 8 draft picks, a TCU record, including a quarterback who's kind of important. All right? And I know this immediately gets turned into like, oh, you can't really give him credit. No, I'd want the full scope of the conversation. So with a big victory lap on Saturday, which is deserved, again, we get it. We get his motivations behind it, and we know his personality. If CU goes 7-5, it's a huge win. If it's 6-6, do people get to make fun of him? Are people waiting on the next loss? 6-6 at what has been one of the worst Power 5 programs in recent years. Like, that's, I think, a huge win. And proof of concept feels a little techie, but know this, like, we're all going to be paying attention. They own college football on a Saturday afternoon in a way Colorado hasn't in a really long time. All right. Quick before we get to Clat, I want to talk about Florida State's beating of LSU. Going in, I didn't really know what to expect. I'm not as high on Jaden Daniels as it feels like everybody else is. I know they seem like they figured some stuff out. Most teams aren't going to beat Bama. So it was a big win. The A&M loss for LSU last year was like a classic letdown. And then, oh, that's right, A&M, despite being a mess, is talented. And then when you watched LSU play Georgia, you're like, there's a gap here. So going in with the hype around it, I think long-term LSU's defense is fine. As far as the front, the corners had a disastrous day. And Keon Coleman, who I think had 8 touchdowns at Michigan State, absolutely lit up LSU, and he was terrific. And Jordan Travis is a better quarterback than Jaden Daniels, despite his terrible second quarter, which was just so odd because they were like some awful decisions that he was making for a guy that's really steady and can get you out of some problems, which is my favorite way of looking at college quarterbacks. Like, hey, at some point over the next 3 hours, things are going to break down. Things are going to feel like they're working. Can you find a way to survive outside of whatever the plan is? And that's kind of how I look at Daniels, is that once the plan breaks down, I don't really think there's a lot there. I was shocked that he was second in the Heisman odds. Shocked. And it really only took me the first possession to realize that I still feel right about this. LSU, a couple plays, they get down to first and goal at the Florida State 5. On second and goal, Jaden goes to run. He's getting stuffed. It looks like he's actually going to take a loss for a sack, but then Florida State's hit with a roughing call, which it was just kind of went too long, but I thought it was kind of a weak call. So it's first and goal again now at the 2. And he throws that fade route, which is mandatory, that everybody with one of their 4 downs from like inside the 10-yard line, they have to throw one to the corner if you get one-on-one to Neighbors, who's supposed to be a pretty good receiver. He throws a line drive right into the back of the defensive back for Florida State. Neighbors looks back to Jaden's like, hey, throw it up. Like, it's one thing to make that throw. It's another to never give your receiver a chance. You're like, what was that throw? Then, like, for some reason, I think he was trying to make up for it, tries to hit Neighbors again. He's out of bounds. There was a guy way out to the right, got underneath the defender. It was clear out under there. Never even looked at it, never even saw it. The worst play of this whole sequence is fourth and goal at the Florida State 1. He takes a 13-yard sack. So it's one thing to not convert, but at least they would be backed up to their own end zone. Instead, you give them all this yardage and you never even throw the ball, throw a pop-up in the air. And if it's picked, it's likely that you're going to stop him anyway. You're not getting the ball back if this doesn't work out. And then he didn't process like, okay, risk, reward now. What's my, like, how much risk can I now take because it's fourth down? We should take all the risk in that spot. There's just little things with him that there'll be a nice couple runs. There'll be, a throw where he had from the right hash to the left side that was a really impressive arm throw. He had that sneak where he wasn't even close to the first down marker, and he tried to like just jump through 20 bodies at the middle of the field. And yeah, I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem for LSU and what their aspirations are. And look, everybody can write them off. They lost to Florida State last year and ended up having a good season. But I'll just tell you, when I saw the Heisman odds, I was like, I disagree with these odds. Later this week, I'll talk a little bit about, or maybe I'll just carry it over into the second week, Ohio State's quarterback stuff, Alabama's quarterback stuff. Penn State looked really good. Drew Aller looks terrific. But it wasn't a great opening weekend. So those are kind of your 2 headline games.